broken promises to build
Is the
rail and
boiling
road.
frustration of commuters.
Western Australia will choke if this rail line is not built. I don't think it's much different than when I first came into politics.
Job ahead is past one and only debate of the campaign.
Present himself as a credible alternative.
Today I'm here to right a wrong. I gave it my best. It didn't happen.
Slipped up on a key policy.
This is a poorly serviced area.
10.5 kilometre rail links to the airport. It'll be up to the voters.
Hello and welcome to the People's Town Hall election debate. My name's Jason Jordan and I'll be your host this evening. Thank you to all of the WA voters who have turned up this evening at the Perth Town Hall, and thank you to all of you watching this evening, whether via West TV or on the internet itself. It's great to have your company. Now, we do have a few spare seats still available here at the Perth Town Hall, so if you've got nothing better to do over the next hour or so, pop on down and you'll be able to ask some questions as well. This is a true town hall meeting. None of the politicians this evening have scripts, none of them have rehearsed. It's a true town hall meeting where you will get to ask questions of these, well, representatives who would like to be your representatives. It is disappointing that Premier Colin Barnett and our opposition leader Mark McGowan chose not to be a part of this debate this evening. They're otherwise engaged, but there is a silver lining. That means that we have a better opportunity to speak to the smaller parties and find out from the other parties who don't normally get to be able to have their voice. They'll be able to have their voice this evening. Now, if you want, you can send questions through. If you're on Twitter, just use the hashtag WAPoll and we'll take your questions from there. We have a little piece of paper that each of the people attending tonight also have. If you write your questions on there, we will read those out for you as well. Now, tonight I won't be asking many questions. I may fill in if we do need to follow up on a particular question. Most of the questions will be coming from the floor. But we also have Paul Cook, who will be getting those questions. Paul, good evening.
Good evening. Hello, Jason.
All right, now Paul will be dragged around the place, I'm expecting. We do need your participation to make this as dynamic as possible. The tweets again, Facebook as well, if you would like to join us on there. But I think now it's probably time to get well underway. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever West TV Perth election debate. If I could please ask on stage now Ken Travers and Kevin Morgan. Thank you, gentlemen. You now have 1 minute each to explain who you are and why you're here. Ken Travers, you're first.
Thank you, Jason. Look, I'm the Labor Shadow Minister for Transport and obviously representing the Labor Party. We believe it's important to be here, and we thank WTV for putting on tonight's debate. This election that is coming up is about priorities. It's about whether we want better services and the right infrastructure for our towns and suburbs. WA Labor has a comprehensive plan that deals with better healthcare, more police on the beat, better education and the right infrastructure, plans like MetroNet that will revolutionise the way in which we travel around our city. The current government has had its priorities wrong over the last 4.5 years. It's failed to invest in the essential infrastructure that our suburbs and towns across Western Australia not only will require. Things like safer country roads. MetroNet is good for the Perth area. We also need to make sure we have safer country roads. That includes investing in things like the Tier 3 rail to keep as much the grain freight on rail and off the roads. We've also got to make sure that our kids stay in school and attend schools that are really world class. So that's why we've put a focus on getting kids into school, because we understand police on the beat is important. At the same time, we need to be tackling the causes of crime, and that's keeping kids in school, schools where we will make science a focus, because we need to be planning for beyond the boom. It's great at the moment, we're riding the crest of the wave of the mining industry, but we need to make sure we've got industries. When the mining industry starts to taper off, areas like tourism, manufacturing, science and technology are there to continue the West Australian economy growing well into the future.
Thank you, Ken. Kevin, 1 minute for you.
Yes, as the Mayor of Cottesloe over the last 8 years, I've had the privilege to see how this town works. And I suppose what I've seen is that we've got corporate cronyism masquerading as party politics. And my aim is to provide an independent voice for our communities right across WA. And by doing this, I wish to root out the political donations that distort our public policy, and to also make sure that some of the manifestations of that are rid of as well, including, for instance, the centralisation and politicisation of our local building controls, which essentially is taking us down the same path that Labor took New South Wales and is being played out on our TVs nightly at the moment. At the same time, they are now seeking to forcibly abolish our long pedigreed local democracies, and that's just taking us further down that same path. I stand as an independent that stands against the idea of throwing around billion-dollar election commitments without any plans to fund it other than more debt, which is going to strip us of our AAA credit rating and deprive us of any more spending commitments for the next 10 years. I suppose what I say to the communities of WA is that Parliament is like a very big club, and guess what? You're not in it.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, time for us to take our first questions from the floor. Paul.
A couple of ways we're taking questions tonight. You can hashtag #AwayPoll, of course, on Twitter, or you can fill out a form we have on the seats here at the Town Hall. Some people obviously don't want to ask the question themselves, and so that's my job, hence our first question this evening. This comes from a lady called Isabel from Balcatta. This one's for you, Ken Travers. It says, this election seems to be all about public transport to a large degree. Why has it taken so long for it to make the front page so regularly in this, up to this point?
Well, thanks for that question. Look, the first thing I would say is that I've certainly been raising the problems of public transport over the last 4.5 years, and it has been neglected by the Barnett government. Previous Labor governments have always made better public transport a focus. It was a Labor government that built the railway line to Mandurah. It was a Labor government that built the railway line to Joondalup and eventually extended it out to Clarkson. We have had a very strong history. That's why we've put forward Metronet. But that's not the only things that we're talking about in this election. We have a plan. On the weekend, we announced $100 million for better cancer treatment and cancer research. $45 million to bring down waiting lists, and we have a $300 million package for the Northern Health Initiative. We've got, we want to rebuild our schools, and we're putting over $1 billion into that
Ken,
program.
I'm going to pull you aside because the question was about public transport. This is a little unlike ABC debates. This is the West TV debate, so we are going to be a little bit more dynamic about how we interact. So if I could steer you back towards public transport.
Well, I think we have been constantly. I certainly, as the Shadow Minister for Transport, I have regularly been raising the issue. Take, for example, the fact that the Barnett government was told in 2008 they needed to order more rail cars. They actually cancelled the process that was in train and commenced by the previous Labor government to order more trains. They were told again in 2009 and 2010. It wasn't until 2011, when the problem was there, people were being squeezed onto trains like sardines, that they finally responded. And to this day, they still haven't ordered enough. They've got a piecemeal approach to dealing with it. They still have not understood the problems that Perth is facing. We are a growing city. Congestion is only going to get worse. You need a plan to address it. Metronet is that plan. It will connect our suburbs, not just into and out of the city, but across the city. It provides rail lines to the airport. It's got a complete way of moving around the city that will really address the future of Western Australia transport.
Thank you for that. Kevin, did you want to say something about public transport?
Yes, look, I'm committed to public transport, but I suppose where I differ is I think our parties just don't work hard enough to have plans for how they're going to fund this. We've got oodles of vacant state land beside our major arterial routes, including where they're going to put the train lines and including the Fremantle line that's been in existence for 100 years. What we need to do is we need to develop that land adjacent to the railway lines so that we can put in transit-orientated developments particularly for the aged, and we can use that money to offset the cost of these needed public transport routes.
In the absence of the Liberal Party here this evening, I feel that it's still okay for us to ask questions that probably they would prefer to be here to answer. Ken, when it comes to public transport, it seems that Labor is the only party that really has ever ordered any trains.
Well, in fact, of the current fleet of 234 trains, I think from memory, 10 have been ordered by the Liberal Party in Western Australia, and that was back in 2000. And again, it took a campaign by the then Shadow Minister for Transport, someone well known in this state, Alana McTiernan, to finally get them to put that order in, the same as we had to force them to put the most recent order in. Can I make the one point though, is that with Metronet, we have taken the tough decisions to fund it. We have actually identified over $4 billion in savings and measures to make sure that we have the money to fund it. We're not relying on Commonwealth money. We'll certainly seek Commonwealth money, but we are not relying on it, unlike the Liberal Party.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add?
Yes, look, they might have all their measures for savings, but let's face it, we see time and again on every election that they basically rob Paul to pay Peter. They're going to destroy existing programs and existing assets by underfunding their upkeep or underfunding their ongoing programs. What we need to do is we need to find better ways to find new funds to fund these routes, and that can be done along the lines I've explained on the last question.
Fantastic, thank you. Paul, another question from the floor.
Yes, we have a question from our audience. Thank you, Jason. This one comes from Patricia from Churchlands. Patricia, if you'd like to stand up. You have a question for someone this evening?
Yes, I have, really for either candidate. I speak as a resident of one of the driest state in Australia, and I'm very concerned about our water. When will the voice of the people and scientists be heard over the vast gas industry lobby regarding the serious threats to our water, to our air quality, to our environment with unconventional gas fracking, which is just started in this state, but it could grow like topsy? Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, for your question.
If we could keep the answers to around about a minute, that would be great.
Thanks for the question. And look, I agree with you that we are in a dry state and we need to be very careful about how we use our water, and we need to use it very carefully and wisely. And we need to make sure that whenever we introduce new processes in Western Australia, we do it with thorough environmental protection, and we actually respect the Environmental Protection Authority, and we use those bodies to ensure that we are protecting the environment of Western Australia. That's a focus for the WA Labor.
Audience, or do you want
Ken?
Yes, look, what we need to do is we need to make sure that our politicians actually are protecting the community's assets and are actually weighing up the merits of the various proposals and not simply pandering to those who are paying their election bills. What worries me is the gas industry may well have a leg up here simply because of their funding role in donations. What we need to do is we need to heavily regulate this before it starts. And in terms of the gas industry and our water supply in the future, I do believe that what we do need is, I suppose, a flow of gas being provided to us from this state's assets that are being dug up continuously so that we can keep powering our desalination plants, because I'm afraid that's what we're going to have to rely on from here on in.
Gentlemen, I have a question for you along those lines. We do have an enormous amount of natural resources here, including natural gas. Why is it that we in WA, with all of that gas available to us, are paying such a ridiculous amount of money for our gas? Surely we should be getting it at the bottom cost that it can be.
Looking at it's often to try and go into the economics of it is probably very difficult. But what I would say is when Alan Carpenter was the Premier, he made sure that we reserved gas in Western Australia for domestic use. And I think that is very important to ensure that as we go forward, that a percentage of the gas of new projects that come on is reserved for West Australians, and that will hopefully keep the prices down.
And I would say that was a good first step, but what they didn't do is they didn't make sure that that gas can be brought on stream when we need it. Instead, it's left to the operator to decide as to when they will provide it to us. And I suppose the other thing is the pipeline that runs down here, as far as I'm aware, there's actually a limit saying that you can't get gas down to Perth at a cheaper price than what the owners of that pipeline can bring it, and that's something I suspect came under Labor as well.
I think you might find it came under Mr Barnett's privatisation of that pipeline, someone that I know you're keen to get rid of from the state parliament.
Yeah, well, we agree on that. We do agree on that.
Thank you, gentlemen. Back to the audience now. Paul?
Thank you, Jason. We have a question from Greg. As you are aware, our audience may not be aware if you've just tuned in, the Liberal Party were invited to our debate here this evening. They didn't send anyone. That's how much they cared about entering part of the fray here. Greg is with us. He had a question. He's from Wanneroo for the Liberal Party, but I'll let him put it to two members standing up on the stage this evening. Greg, you wanted to ask a question about the shale industry. If you'd like to stand up, please.
This question has been somewhat asked by Trish already, but I was just asking why the other major parties supporting development of shale gas in WA, despite its many risks to our environment and future health, and while there is a pressing need to develop renewable energies instead because of the severe problem we're facing with catastrophic climate change within some of our lifetimes even. So why isn't there an emphasis on developing renewables in the state instead of digging up these polluting, inefficient forms of energy like unconventional gas?
And may I just tag on that, Ken, you may want to answer as the Labor alternative as well. Do you have an alternative? Do you have a renewable energy plan that is different than the current government?
WA Labor is committed to renewable energy. We've still obviously got some election commitments to outline as we go through the election. I mean, I think when it comes to power, I mean, there's one trying to help the community to reduce the power they use, to put in place mechanisms to assist people so they're using less power in their homes, and that will help them. Because as everyone is well aware, over the last 4.5 years, we've seen 62% increase. In terms of, so I don't accept the premise that Labor is opposed to developing, supporting and encouraging the renewable energy market. And in fact, I've got to say, one of the things that has really helped the renewable energy sector in Western Australia is the reforms that we put in place when we were last in government. Reforms that Mr Barnett wants to turn back, that allowed the renewable energy to be able to compete, to get into that market and to compete and sell their energy on the open marketplace. And that, whenever I talk to renewable energy companies, they say that has been one of the most important reforms to allow them to be in the marketplace selling their renewable energy.
Thank you, Ken. Kevin?
Well, let's face it, what you see from either party is Tweedledee, Tweedledum. The real root cause here is once again the political donation arrangements. It's the incumbent businesses that can fund our political campaigns. This year alone, there's going to be more than $200 million in political donations, and they don't give that without expecting that and a lot more in return. So I suppose when you look at who's funding the campaigns, maybe there's shale gas industry there, maybe there's not, but I suspect if they're not there, they soon will be.
Kevin, we've had a tweet come through. The question is your only motivation in running for Cottesloe to decapitate the coalition government?
Look, I must admit, I am, I suppose, a Liberal at heart, and I realise that the best way forward for them is to lose their leader so they can refine their way. And I make no bones about that. Lop off the head, so to speak. But yes, down in Cottesloe, I suppose after 20 years with Mr Barnett, we have seen that the Liberals think they can't lose, so we get nothing. Labor know they can't win, so we get nothing. The only chance for our communities to have a real voice for change is through an independent.
Now, Ken, the Perth to Darwin Highway was announced today. What's that all about?
It's an interesting concept, the point that you say was announced. It was the government saying they were going to build it if they get Commonwealth money. Now, WA Labor also supports the construction of the Perth to Darwin Highway. What we're not going to do is go out there and make commitments to the people of Western Australia without having the Commonwealth Government signed up to it. It will be a new road that heads from basically north of Tonkin Highway, where Tonkin Highway currently hits Reid Highway, and heads out to join the Northern Highway north of Bullsbrook. It's a very important part of the infrastructure. We see it as, in terms of metropolitan roads, the next big one, the priority one, but we've got to get support from the Commonwealth Government to fund that. And it's just dishonest of a government to be out there making a commitment before they've got that federal government funding, because until you get that funding, you can't give a firm commitment. Although, I mean, it's been interesting because it's probably the local Liberal candidate for Swan Hills has now set a record where he's actually broken one of his election commitments before the election's even been concluded, because he was promising it in a letter a couple of weeks ago that it would be, construction would start in 2014. Today, the Premier and the Minister for Transport is saying that it will start in 2016. But until we get that Commonwealth money, what I can assure the people of the North Eastern Corridor is we will be going hard in to the Commonwealth Government to get funding for that road.
I'm going to have to hold you there. Thanks, Ken.
That's it.
All right, back to the audience. Paul, we've got another question.
Thank you, Jason. Doing an excellent job. This one is from Luke in Armidale, who is in row 4. Luke of Armidale, there you are. I count 3. If you'd like to stand up, please, Luke. You have a question. We'll put it to Ken first, because poor Ken hasn't had much time up there on the front. But do you have a question about donations?
Yeah, so I was wondering, and I guess I was hoping that the Liberal Party would be here to answer it as well, but if Labor are elected, what will you do to reform, as Kevin's been talking about, the political donations issues to make it more equitable for small parties and individuals like myself who are one day interested in running for Parliament but lack the funding to do it ourselves and haven't got the backing of big businesses donating to us?
Thank you for your question, Luke.
Look, and I do understand, and one of the things that WA Labor did was to actually introduce public funding for elections. So many of the smaller political parties that are here tonight will actually receive funding if they get over the threshold in terms of, from memory, it's about 4% of the vote. They then are eligible for public funding. That's one mechanism. Look, I'm always happy to move towards greater transparency of public donations. That's my personal view, and I think it's something that we do need to actually have the sunshine on who's making donations and doing it in a far more timely way than it's currently done. At the moment, you can make a donation and we don't find out about it for 18 months. Now, those are sort of measures that I would certainly be keen to personally support. I think it's something that we do need to make sure that people know. I've got to say, I've never been influenced by a donation. I wouldn't even know who are the big donors to the party in Western Australia for the Labor Party. They don't influence how I make my decisions. And I think people need to look at this election, who is getting the real big dollars in terms of donations and who will be spending the most money over this election campaign.
Thank you, Ken. Kevin, I noticed that you were screwing your face up a little bit there.
Well, Ken, I might just say unions, big business. Look, the reality is that unless you're on the electoral roll, you shouldn't be able to donate. That should cut out unions and corporates. And for $5 a year each, we can have fully funded election campaigns, and there should be an upper limit on how much each of us on the electoral roll can donate, such as $1,500 as been proposed by the current Premier of New South Wales. That's the only way to make sure that our public policy is no longer distorted.
Gentlemen, oh, some applause starting there. Gentlemen, I've got one question now for you both, and I'd like to see you answer it as short as possible. The Perth Stadium, what do you have to say about that? The proposed stadium.
Very simple. WA Labor will build a new stadium at Kitchener Park in the same time frame, and we will save $250 million that we will use to invest in Metronet so we get the public transport. We believe it will be a world-class stadium, identical to the stadium that would be built at Burswood. We believe Kitchener Park, and the task force believed Kitchener Park was the better location, and it saves money to build Metronet.
Kevin.
We need to build a stadium that this state can afford, and in doing that we have to weigh up the merits against other competing priorities. This is $1 billion football business, and I suspect they can throw in a bit more than $3 to $5 million that they've offered. But at the heart of all this is I do disagree with Mr Barnett's proposal, which is basically in order to cap it at his $700 million figure that he plucked out of the air. He's basically privatised most of this stadium, and we will all pay the price for that in years to come, because the private owners of this equity, they will want their pound of flesh later on, and we're going to have elitist ticket prices where your kids won't be able to afford to go anyway.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Travers and Kevin Morgan.
Thanks, Jason.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break now. Before we do, though, a reminder that you can still make your way down to the Perth Town Hall. There are plenty of seats available. And if you're watching us on the internet or on West TV, you can get your questions in via Twitter and Facebook. If you're on Twitter, just use the hashtag #WAPoll. We'd love to see you down here. And also, just before we go to the break, if any of the Liberals are watching this evening, I know you're lost in action at the moment, but you'd be most welcome to come down here. We still have a podium spot for you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Perth Town Hall election debate. We'll be right back after this.